Hi, we're going to show you today about the Aveho test that we do in the lab here at Ultratech. We use mason jars. This is a half-gallon size, and we're going to walk you through the different steps we use to be able to put a test piece of Wypall that's been treated with Aveho inside this jar. We're going to inject it with odor, use a Drager tube to test the amount of odor inside the jar. And then we'll record our results and we'll take you through that whole process. So one of the preliminary steps in this test is to put a rubber septum into the lids for the mason jars. And we've drilled these out. We have all the specifics of this test, including the drill bit size and the part numbers for all the different products involved on an attachment or a document that we'll be able to provide. So what we're going to do is take out one of the rubber septum, and we're going to, top of the lid has the ball jar logo on it, the bottom has this orange or brown ring on it. We're going to insert the tip into the hole, hold it there with my thumb. I'm going to use needle nose pliers to help pull it out. And I try to do this carefully. I'm continuing to push the septum with my thumb and pull it. I'm careful to not rip the rubber. If I do damage or rip that rubber, then I go ahead and throw that septum away and start with a fresh one. Once that tip of the septum's through that hole, then I use another tool and I pull that all the way through. And right now we can see that there's this notch here, and so it's not all the way through. I continue to pull until it's all the way through. And now it's completely inserted into the lid. There's a little bit of rust that's come off the tool, but that's not a problem. So I'll continue to do this for the other two lids. Okay, one of the next preparation steps we do for this test is to cut the media that we've applied the Wypall to into an appropriate size. So the type of media we're using here is called Wypall. It's a Kimberly-Clark product. We've sometimes used the X60 version of Wypall. This piece is actually an X70 piece. These pieces are also X70 Wypall. And these have all been applied. These have been dipped into Aveho liquid that's been shaken up just a little bit so it appears homogeneous. And then we put this through a dip and squeeze operation through a patter, and we've generally patted these at 20 psi. So what we're going to do, these pieces are already cut up into size, but we're going to cut this into quarter pieces. And we're using this thing, it's like paper cutter, paper trimmer here. Sometimes it doesn't cut all the way through, but there's a nice clean line to help to rip it apart. So what we're going to do actually with the first jar here is we're going to leave this jar empty with absolutely nothing in it except air. In the second jar, we're going to place a piece of the Wypall, but this is Wypall that's been untreated. This has no product on it, no Aveho, that is. Then in the third jar, we're going to place a piece of the treated Wypall. It's been treated with Aveho. And now that these are sealed up, we'll get to injecting the odor chemical into each of them. Okay, now that we have the Wypall put into the jars, we're actually going to take our odorant, and in this case we've chosen to use triethylamine, and it comes in a jar from Sigma Aldrich with this nice sure seal on the top so that it's not going to leak out, and we have to use a syringe to be able to remove the chemical. So we're going to make sure that the tip of the syringe is down beneath the liquid. And then right here we can actually see there's an air pocket. There's the liquid and there's an air pocket, and then there's the metal rod. In this test, we're actually going to first remove the air pockets as much as possible. I'm moving that rod of the syringe up and down. So now there's no more air pockets. We're going to try to get to 2.5 microliters. So there we are, about 2.5 microliters. We'll remove the syringe, and then we're going to carefully insert this into the rubber septum. I'm trying to insert it into the center of the septum, and I'm using my left hand while I'm pushing down with my right hand to try to force that needle through that septum. And this may not come up on the video, but when I inject, and I'm going to pop the top of the syringe fairly quickly, I'll go like this. It may be difficult to see with the camera, but with the eye we can actually see that there's a little bit of liquid that leaves the tip of that syringe as a confirmation that we've actually done the injection. Okay. So now we're going to start the timer, and at 2 minutes we'll do the injection of the second jar. Insert this in the center of the jar here, the center of the septum, and then at the 2 minute mark, it's 150 right now. At the 2 minute mark, we'll go ahead and actually do the injection into that jar. Okay, here we go. One thing I forgot to mention before, and I don't think it's a problem in this case, but we like to shake the jars 3 times just to sort of aid in the disbursement of the odor into the air within the jar. So I'll do that again here for jar number 2. We'll do that same thing where we shake the jar 3 times. We'll do that just before we do the Drager tube testing as well. So we also have a data collection sheet here, and we're going to document the injection time for the empty jar. It's 0 minutes. For the empty Wypall, which is jar number 2, we injected at 2 minutes. And when we do the 1 gallon, which we intend to do at 4 minutes, then we'll document that injection time then as well. Okay, shake this jar 3 times, and we'll document the injection time as 4 minutes. And then once we get to 10 minutes, we will perform our first Drager tube test on the first jar. So it's 8 minutes into our time. At 10 minutes, we'll do the first Drager test, or as close to 10 minutes as we can. We're going to start off with our we have a Drager tube pump here. This is just a hand pump. And in this port here, we're going to put in a Drager tube. It also has a counter here, so you can keep track of how many strokes. So that's 1 stroke. and it can be reset just with this little button here. We have a Draeger tube cutting tool. Because the Draeger tubes are glass and they're sealed on both ends, and in order to use the tube we have to cut the tube with this little tool here. Now we've injected triethylamine into these jars. They make different Draeger tubes for different chemicals. This Draeger tube is designed specifically for triethylamine. So one tube has the ends that are sealed, the top and the bottom. So we're going to cut those ends open right now. We're going to insert the tube into this area. We're going to rotate it back and forth a couple times, and then we're just going to snap it. And now that end is cut. Do the exact same thing to the top of the tube. The end is cut. Now we're going to insert the end with the arrow into the Draeger tube pump. And then it's right about 10 minutes, so it's perfect. We're going to take this number 1 jar, shake it a couple times. We're going to pull out this rubber septum. And actually before that I'm going to squeeze the pump. I'm going to pull out the rubber septum, insert it, make sure I've got a nice clean insertion, and then I'm going to release. And you can see that yellow changing to blue. That's indicative of triethylamine in the jar. We know we put it there, but this is going to show us a rough approximation of the concentration. I'm going to rotate this around. There's this dot here. And when that dot turns white, that means that the test is complete. There we go. Okay, so we've completed a single stroke of the Draeger tube. This type of Draeger tube for triethylamine, it's called triethylamine 5/A. You can do up to 5 strokes, but what we keep track of here on this data sheet is we keep track of a few different things. You could keep track of the test time. I'd say that's more for reference than anything else, but we did do the test at 10 minutes. This is the first stroke, so the initial ppm on this is roughly 39. So we'll document that. The number of strokes in this case, so if we did another stroke, we would assume that we would get about another 39 ppm. That would exceed the maximum reading on the tube, which is 60. So we're going to stop with a single stroke in this case. So we're going to document that we did 1 stroke, and in this case the initial is also the final reading, so that's 39. I'll talk more about that a little later. So we'll remove the tube, set it aside, set that first jar aside, and then we'll also reset the Draeger tube pump. And I know that it is past 12 minutes, so it's past the 10 minutes, past the second jar, when the second jar was injected. But that'll be okay. We generally try to make sure that we're not testing one of the jars before 10 minutes has elapsed. If it's after 10 minutes, that's okay. So we'll do the same thing. Cut the Draeger tube ends off with a Draeger tube cutting tool. We take the end with the arrow, insert it into the pump, and we'll do the same thing with the second jar. Shake it 3 times, squeeze the pump, pull the septum out, insert the pump, and release the pump. And we're going to go again until that dot turns white. And there it is. So again, because we exceeded the 30 ppm mark on this tube, we're not going to perform another stroke. So we'll document this as well. I believe the test time was approximately 12 minutes 30 seconds. The initial ppm looks to be about 35. It's one stroke, and in this case the initial is the final ppm, that's also 35. We'll reset the pump, move the tube, set the second jar aside, and repeat the process for the third jar. And the test time will be about 15 minutes in this case, or at the 15-minute mark. And we'll squeeze the pump, take the septum out. You can see in this case, there's a little bit of blue developing in that yellow area, but it's very minimal. This is indicative of the Aveho on the Wypall adsorbing a lot of that triethylamine. And we got that white mark. So in this case, I'm going to document that the first stroke is about 2 ppm, and we'll continue with more strokes. So I do remove the tube from the test jar. That will give a little bit opportunity for a little bit of air to go back in. I squeeze the pump again, and then insert it, and allow another stroke to proceed. If we didn't take that dragger tube out of the jar, there wouldn't be enough air volume inside that jar for that pump to really be able to pull anything out, so we'd kind of be stuck in limbo for a while. So here's test number 2. I'm not going to document anything there, we're just going to keep going until we get to 5 strokes. In any of these tests with a dragger tube, pump and system, we don't want to exceed the maximum reading on the tube. So if we were getting a higher reading initially, maybe like 10 or 15, we wouldn't want to exceed either 5 or 4 or 5 strokes. Okay. Do one more stroke. And in every test, I'm waiting for that white dot to appear on the pump. Once it appears, then we're done with that stroke. Okay, this is our 5th and final stroke. Okay, so we'll document that the overall ppm, the final ppm, is at 5, and the pump kept track of the total number of strokes, so it's also 5. This test was done in 15 minutes. And when we do more tests, we input this into the computer. For this test specifically, or for this tube. It says on top of the tube, and this is also available in the Draeger tube catalog as well. It says n equals 5. And so that's saying that's the number of strokes the tube is designed for. That means that in order to get the relative ppm, or the adjusted ppm, we would take the number of strokes, or take the final ppm, divide by the number of strokes, and then multiply by 5. So again, to get the adjusted ppm, based on the fact that for the triethylamine tube, n equals 5, we're going to take the final ppm divided by the number of strokes times n. So in the case of the jar number 1, that's 39 over 1 times 5 equals 195. So that's the inside jar number 1, it was roughly, there was 195 parts per million triethylamine. That would be 175 for jar number 2, and for jar number 3, that would be just 5. So you can see how dramatic the difference is between an empty jar, and there's not really a dramatic difference between the empty jar and the empty piece of Wypall, but there's a dramatic difference between the Aveho that's been applied to Wypall and the empty Wypall. It's quite drastic. So now that we're complete with the test has been completed, we're going to take the jars, throw the Wypall away, and we're actually working on installing a fume hood right now. So in lieu of that, we're going to put them in this area, the fan, and we're going to let them stay in this area where they're being evacuated for maybe 20 or 30 minutes, just to make sure that there's no odor left in the jar. And we'll put our supplies away, we'll clean our syringe out with a little bit of acetone and allow that to dry. And I don't think there's any other specific cleanup other than that.